Welcome back, everyone. Before we begin today, I want you to do something for me. I want you to think about a moment. Maybe it happened last week, maybe it happened last year, where you were in a difficult conversation at work. Maybe your manager gave you feedback that felt unfair. Maybe a colleague challenged you in a meeting in front of everyone. Maybe you were in a negotiation and you felt like the other person was not listening to you at all. Now, what did you do in that moment? Did you rush to defend yourself? Did you start talking faster, using more words, trying to explain everything at once? Did you feel your heart beating a little faster, your hands getting a little warmer, your mind racing to find the right thing to say? If you said yes to any of that, you are completely normal. And today, everything changes. Because here is the truth that most English learners, and honestly, even most native English speakers, never fully understand. The most powerful thing you can say in a difficult professional conversation is sometimes nothing at all. That's right, silence. Strategic, deliberate, controlled silence. I know what you might be thinking. Mano, silence in a professional meeting? Won't that make me look weak? Won't people think I don't know what to say? And that is exactly the illusion I want to destroy today. Because the opposite is true. In fact, the executives, the leaders, and the skilled communicators who dominate high-stakes conversations, they are not the ones talking the most. They are the ones who have mastered the art of knowing when to stop talking. And when they do talk, every single word carries weight. Today, you and I are going to go on a journey together. This is not just an English lesson, although you absolutely will improve your English today. This is a masterclass in professional communication. You are going to learn how to handle the most difficult conversations you will ever face in a workplace environment using two tools that will completely transform the way you communicate: strategic silence and active listening. And here is what makes today's lesson especially exciting. These are not abstract ideas. These are real practical techniques with real phrases, real scripts, and real examples that you can start using immediately. Whether you are in a job interview, a performance review, a team meeting, or a complex negotiation. Let me tell you what we are going to cover today so you know exactly what to expect. First, we are going to talk about something called the illusion of urgency. And I promise you, once you understand this concept, you will never again feel pressured to respond immediately in a difficult conversation. Then, we are going to break down the mechanics of strategic silence, exactly how to use silence as a tool, and what your body language needs to look like while you do it. After that, we are going to transform the way you think about listening. Active listening is not passive. It is not just waiting for your turn to speak. Active listening is a power move, and I am going to show you exactly how to use it. Then, we are going to look at specific phrases and language tools, what I call bridge scripts and open-ended impact questions that will help you steer even the most difficult conversations toward resolution. And finally, we are going to put it all together with a clear blueprint for mastering resolution. How to close a difficult conversation in a way that makes you look like a true leader. This is going to be a long lesson, and it is going to be worth every single minute. So get comfortable, grab something to drink, and let's dive in. Let's start with a question. When was the last time someone said something to you at work? Maybe a criticism, a challenge, or a difficult piece of feedback, and you felt like you needed to respond right now, like there was no time to think, like the pressure of the silence was unbearable and you just had to say something? That feeling? It has a name, and understanding it is the first step to conquering it. We call it the illusion of urgency. Here is what the illusion of urgency is. It is the false belief that you must respond immediately to every challenge, every criticism, and every difficult question in a professional conversation, and that any pause, any moment of silence is a sign of weakness, confusion, or incompetence. Now, where does this feeling come from? Because it is not accidental. It is actually something that modern professional culture has built into us very deliberately. Think about the world we live in today. Emails need to be answered within hours. Messages on your phone appear and disappear. Meetings are packed one after another. Your manager wants a decision by the end of the day. Your colleague sends you a question and watches the little dots on the screen to see if you are typing back. Everywhere you look, speed is rewarded. Being fast is seen as being smart. Being busy is seen as being valuable. This is what experts call the always-on culture of the modern corporation. And it creates a very specific psychological trap. The trap works like this. Because speed is so rewarded in everyday professional life, when a high-stakes, emotionally charged conversation happens, your brain applies the same rule. Respond fast, don't pause, fill the silence. Because if you don't, people will think you are weak, confused, or unprepared. But here is the critical problem with that belief. A quick response to a low-stakes email is efficient. A quick response to a high-stakes confrontation is dangerous. These are two completely different situations, and they require two completely different strategies. Let me give you an example to make this very clear. Imagine you are in a performance review meeting with your manager. Your manager says, "I've been noticing that your report submissions have been consistently late over the past quarter. This is affecting the team's productivity. Can you explain what's been happening?" Now, most people, caught in the illusion of urgency, will immediately start talking. They will say something like, "Oh yes, I know, I'm sorry. It's just that I've had so much on my plate, and I've been trying to manage multiple projects, and I know I should have communicated better, and I'll definitely improve going forward," and they just keep going. More and more words, faster and faster, defending themselves, apologizing, making promises, filling every second of air with sound. And what does that response actually communicate? It communicates anxiety. It communicates that you were caught off guard. It communicates that you are reactive rather than thoughtful. It actually makes you look less professional, not more. Now compare that to a leader who takes a breath, maintains eye contact for 3 to 5 seconds, and then says calmly and clearly, "That's an important observation. I want to make sure I respond to that thoughtfully. Can I share my perspective on what's been driving that pattern?" Same situation, same question. Completely different energy, completely different authority. The second response communicates composure. It communicates confidence. It communicates that you are someone who thinks before they speak. And ironically, that very pause, that moment of silence, is what makes you look the most competent person in the room. So let me explain what is actually happening in your body and brain when you feel the illusion of urgency. Because understanding the science here is going to help you overcome it. When someone challenges you, criticizes you, or confronts you in a professional setting, your body does something very specific. It triggers what neuroscientists call the fight or flight response. Your brain releases a chemical called cortisol, the stress hormone. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallower. The blood flow in your brain actually shifts away from your prefrontal cortex, which is the part responsible for logical thinking, strategic planning, and language processing, and moves toward your amygdala, which is the part responsible for emotional reactive responses. In simple terms, when you are under stress, your brain literally becomes less intelligent, at least temporarily. This is why when you are in a heated argument or a difficult conversation, you sometimes say things that you later regret. It is not because you are stupid. It is because your brain was temporarily in survival mode rather than leadership mode. And the cure? Time. Even just a few seconds of time. Research from neuroscience shows that even a 3 to 5 second pause before responding in a stressful conversation is enough to allow the prefrontal cortex to re-engage. Your cortisol levels begin to stabilize. Your thinking becomes clearer. Your language becomes more precise. Your response becomes more powerful. This is not a small difference. This is the difference between a reactive employee and a strategic leader. Now, I want to introduce you to something that I am going to call the rhythmic pause. This is going to be one of the most important tools in your entire professional communication toolkit. The rhythmic pause is a deliberate, intentional moment of silence that you place at the beginning of your response to a difficult question or challenging comment. It is not an accident. It is not confusion. It is a skill that you consciously choose to use. And here is why it is called rhythmic. Because the best communicators use it consistently, naturally, and confidently, so that it becomes a rhythm in their communication style. Not just once in one emergency, but as a regular feature of how they speak. Think about the most powerful speakers you have ever heard. Think about great politicians, great executives, great teachers. Have you noticed that they never seem rushed? That even when they are asked a difficult question, there is a kind of stillness about them before they answer. They seem to be in control of the tempo, the speed and rhythm of the entire conversation. That is not an accident. That is the rhythmic pause in action. Now I want to give you some very specific practical English phrases that you can use to execute the rhythmic pause professionally. Because one concern that English learners often have is, Mano, if I pause for 5 seconds and say nothing, won't that be awkward? Won't it feel strange? And the answer is yes. If you just sit there in silence with no acknowledgement at all, it can feel a little strange. But there is a beautifully simple solution. You use what communication experts call a bridging phrase. A bridging phrase is a short, calm sentence that you say while you are actually buying yourself time to think. Here are some examples. Listen carefully to the language. These are phrases you can actually memorize and use starting today. Bridging phrases for the rhythmic pause. That's an interesting point. Let me think about that for a moment. I want to make sure I answer that properly. Give me just a second. That's worth exploring carefully. My initial thought is, I appreciate you raising that. Let me make sure I understand what you're asking before I respond. That's a fair question. I want to be precise in how I answer it. Before I respond, I want to make sure I'm addressing the right issue here. Good point. Let me consider that from a couple of angles. Notice what all of these phrases have in common. They are calm, they are respectful, they acknowledge the other person, they buy you time, and they project intelligence and thoughtfulness, not confusion or weakness. When you use these phrases, you are also doing something very powerful communicatively. You are taking ownership of the conversational tempo. You are saying, without saying it directly, I control the pace of this conversation. I decide when we move forward. I am not going to be rushed. And that, my friends, is what authority sounds like in a professional setting. Now, let me give you a real-life scenario to practice this with, because practice is everything. Scenario: you are in a team meeting. A colleague, let us call him David, says in front of the entire team, honestly, I think the proposal you submitted last week was underdeveloped. I'm not sure you really thought through the financial implications. This is a challenging moment. David has publicly questioned your competence. Everyone in the room is looking at you. The illusion of urgency is screaming at you. Say something. Defend yourself. Right now. But instead, you breathe. You maintain eye contact with David, not aggressively, but calmly and steadily. You let about 3 seconds pass, and then you say, I appreciate you sharing that directly, David. That's worth unpacking. Can you point me to the specific section of the proposal where you felt the financial analysis was insufficient? I want to make sure we're addressing the right gap. Let's break down why that response is so powerful. First, you did not react emotionally. You did not say, how dare you say that in front of everyone. You kept your composure. Second, you used a bridging phrase. I appreciate you sharing that directly. That acknowledged David's comment without agreeing or disagreeing. Third, you used the rhythmic pause, both the actual pause and the phrase, to buy yourself time and reframe your thinking. Fourth, and this is crucial, you redirected the conversation from a general personal attack. Your proposal was underdeveloped, to a specific evidence-based question. Which specific section? You forced David to be precise. And if David cannot point to a specific section with specific evidence, that becomes very clear to everyone in the room, without you having to say a single defensive word. That is the power of the rhythmic pause combined with strategic language. But there is something even deeper happening here, and I want to make sure we talk about it before we move on to the next section. Because this next idea is one that most English learners and honestly most professionals have never really thought about deeply. In modern professional culture, there is a very powerful but very unspoken social hierarchy that is communicated entirely through conversational behavior. And one of the most significant signals of status and authority in a professional setting is this. High-status people speak slowly, pause frequently, and never seem rushed. Low-status people speak quickly, fill silence anxiously, and constantly seek approval. Think about that for a moment. Can you think of examples from your own life or from movies, television shows, or business situations where you can see this playing out? The nervous job candidate who talks too fast because they are anxious to impress. The junior employee who over-explains every decision because they are afraid of being judged. The experienced executive who answers a complex question with two calm, precise sentences and then stops. Who sounds more authoritative? Who would you trust more as a leader? The answer is always the person who is comfortable with silence. The person who does not need to fill every second with words. The person who speaks deliberately and with purpose. This is what the rhythmic pause communicates at a deeper social level. Not just I am thinking carefully about your question, but also I am not afraid of this moment. I am not threatened. I am completely in control. And now a thought I want to leave with you before we move to the next section, because I want to create a little bit of curiosity for what is coming. We have talked about why silence is powerful. We have talked about the rhythmic pause. But here is what I have not told you yet. There is a specific type of silence, a very particular advanced technique that does not just give you time to think. It actually forces the other person in the conversation to do your work for you. It makes them reveal their true motivations. It makes them give you information they never intended to give you. And we are going to break that down completely in the very next section. So stay with me, because what is coming next might just be the most important thing you learn about professional communication all year. Section 2. The Mechanics of Strategic Silence. Let me start this section with a concept that comes from the world of professional negotiation and conflict resolution. In negotiation theory, there is a principle called the vacuum effect. The idea is this. Human beings are fundamentally uncomfortable with silence in a conversation. When silence appears, especially after someone has just made a statement or a claim, there is an almost irresistible psychological pressure to fill that silence with words. And here is the fascinating part. More often than not, it is not the person who created the silence who fills it. It is the person who was being listened to. In other words, when you stop talking and you do it deliberately, calmly, and with full composure, the other person in the conversation will feel compelled to keep talking. And when people keep talking under psychological pressure, they reveal things they did not plan to reveal. They backtrack on positions they were holding firmly just seconds before. They offer concessions, compromises that they had no intention of offering. They explain their reasoning in more detail, which gives you incredibly valuable information. Silence, used strategically, is not passive. It is one of the most active and aggressive tools in the professional communicator's toolkit. Let me give you a concrete example of this in action. Imagine you are in a contract negotiation. You have just proposed a figure, let's say a project budget of $50,000. The other party, let us call her Miss Lee, pauses and then says, 50,000 is really high for what we're asking. Now, most people would immediately respond. They would say, well, I can maybe come down to 45,000 if we adjust the scope. Or they would start justifying the price. Well, we need to cover our costs and there's the team hours and the materials and the moment they do that, they have given away their leverage. They have shown that they are willing to move. They have started negotiating against themselves. But what if instead you simply said nothing? You look at Miss Lee calmly. Your expression is neutral, not aggressive, not apologetic, not defensive. Just calm and attentive. You let 3 seconds pass, then 5 seconds, perhaps even 7. And something extraordinary often happens in that silence. Miss Lee, who already feels the psychological pressure of her own statement, begins to talk again. She might say, "Well, I understand that there are real costs involved," or "We might be able to find some flexibility in our timeline if that helps with the budget," or even, "What exactly is included in that 50,000?" Each of those follow-up statements gives you enormous information. Each one is a signal about what Miss Lee actually values, what she is worried about, and where there might be room to find the solution. And you got all of that information without giving anything away, without making any concessions, and without saying a single word. That is the vacuum effect. Now, I want to be very clear about something important here, because this technique can be misunderstood. Strategic silence is not the same as being rude, hostile, or uncommunicative. It is not about staring someone down aggressively or making them feel uncomfortable just for the sake of it. That would be counterproductive and unprofessional. Strategic silence is about being comfortable in the space between words. It is about resisting the impulse to speak before your thought is fully formed. It is about understanding that in many conversations, the person who speaks second, who processes first and responds with intention, holds more power than the person who rushes to fill the air.
The key distinction is this: strategic silence is always paired with active presence. You are not checked out, you are not distracted, you are completely, intensely present and attentive in the conversation. You are just choosing not to produce words in that moment. And that leads us to the second critical component of strategic silence, your body language. Because here is a truth that language teachers sometimes overlook. In a face-to-face professional conversation, words are actually only a fraction of your communication. Research from communication psychology suggests that in emotional or high-stakes conversations, as much as 55% of your message is communicated through your body language, 38% through your tone of voice, and only 7% through the actual words you choose. Now, those exact percentages are sometimes debated by researchers, but the core principle is widely accepted. How you look and how you sound while you are speaking or not speaking matters enormously. So, when you are using strategic silence, your body language has a job to do. And here is exactly what that looks like. Eye contact. Maintain steady, calm, confident eye contact with the person who just spoke. Not a stare that can feel aggressive, but a calm, engaged gaze. Think of it as the kind of eye contact that says, "I heard you, I am processing. I respect you enough to consider what you said carefully before I speak." If there are multiple people in the room, you can slowly allow your gaze to move around the table, which actually signals that you are considering the perspectives of everyone present, not just the person who challenged you. This is a powerful signal of inclusive leadership. Facial positioning. This is something that most people do not think about deliberately, but it makes an enormous difference. Keep your expression neutral and composed. In professional communication training, this is often called a neutral face or sometimes described as a slight attentive expression. What you want to avoid is what communication coaches call micro expressions of reactivity. These are the tiny, fleeting facial expressions that betray your emotional state. The slight frown when someone criticizes you, the raised eyebrow when you hear something you disagree with, the quick look away when you feel uncomfortable. These micro expressions are honest. They show what you are really feeling, but they can undermine your authority in the room because they signal that you have been emotionally affected by what was said. And the moment someone knows they have emotionally affected you, the balance of power in the conversation shifts. So during a strategic silence, practice a calm, neutral, attentive facial expression. Slightly relaxed jaw, lips gently closed, eyes steady and open. Eyebrows neutral, not raised in surprise, not furrowed in irritation. just present. This takes practice, and we will talk about exactly how to practice this later in the video. But for now, just know that your face is constantly communicating during silence, and you want it to communicate composure and authority. Physical posture. Your body should be upright but relaxed. Shoulders back and down, not hunched or tensed. Feet flat on the floor if you are seated at a table. Hands either resting lightly on the table or in your lap. Not fidgeting, not tapping, not crossed tightly across your chest. Crossed arms, by the way, are a common automatic response when someone feels defensive or under attack. It is a natural self-protective posture. But in a professional conversation, crossed arms send a very clear signal. I am closing myself off. I am not open to what you are saying. And that signal works against you when you are trying to manage a difficult conversation. So consciously release that posture. Even if you feel defensive inside, keep your body language open. This is what communication experts call embodied composure. Your body performing calm even when your internal state might not be fully calm yet. And here is something interesting. Research in embodied cognition, the study of how your body affects your mind, suggests that when you consciously adopt a calm, open, composed posture, it actually begins to calm your internal emotional state as well. Your body and your brain have a two-way relationship. Change one and you begin to change the other. So by physically choosing composure, you actually begin to emotionally feel more composed. Breathing. This is perhaps the most overlooked element of body language in professional conversations, but it might be the most important. When we are stressed or anxious, our breathing becomes shallow and rapid. And shallow, rapid breathing actually reinforces the stress response. It keeps the cortisol levels high and the fight or flight mode active. During strategic silence, take one deliberate, slow, quiet breath. Not so obvious that everyone can see it, just a gentle, controlled breath. This one action can be enough to begin bringing your nervous system back toward calm, and it adds naturally to the 3 to 5 second pause you are creating. Many professional communication coaches and executive trainers actually recommend what is known as box breathing during high stakes moments. Breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, breathing out for 4 counts, and holding for 4 counts. This is a technique used by military special forces, surgeons, elite athletes, and yes, top executives to manage stress in real time. You probably will not do the full box breathing in a board meeting, but even one deliberate, slow breath before you respond can make a measurable difference in how clear and composed your response sounds. Now, let me add one more layer to this section that is going to take your understanding of strategic silence to a completely new level. We have talked about how to be silent with your words and your body, but here is something even more advanced. During strategic silence, the best communicators are not actually doing nothing. They are actively observing. While the other person is speaking, and in the moments of silence that follow, elite communicators are reading the room. They are collecting data. They are watching for non-verbal cues that tell them far more than words ever could. Let me explain what I mean and give you a list of specific things to watch for. Because this turns strategic silence from a passive act into a genuinely active diagnostic tool. What to observe during and after strategic silence. Gaze shifting. When someone has just made a strong statement and they are met with silence, watch their eyes. Do they maintain steady eye contact with you, or do their eyes shift downward, to the side, or toward other people in the room? Downward gaze often signals doubt or discomfort with their own statement. Lateral gaze, looking to the side, can indicate that they are searching for support or reconsidering. Micro gestures, small, involuntary physical movements that happen when someone is under psychological pressure. Touching the face, neck, or collarbone often indicates anxiety or discomfort. Pulling at a collar or loosening a tie signals that someone feels physically constrained, often a metaphor for feeling psychologically trapped by their own position. A subtle hand-to-mouth gesture can indicate that they are self-censoring. They have something to say but are holding it back. Verbal filling. When the silence becomes too uncomfortable for the other person, they often use filler phrases like, well, or, I mean, or, Look, all I'm saying is, these are not statements of confidence. They are signals of someone buying themselves time, doing exactly what your bridging phrases do for you, but without the same composed delivery. When you hear these, pay attention to what comes after them, because what comes after them is usually what the person actually wants to say or what they are willing to give. Change in pace. If a person was speaking quickly and forcefully and then slows down after a period of strategic silence, that is often a signal that they are reconsidering their position. If they speed up, they may be feeling more anxious and are trying to cover ground quickly. Either way, the change itself is data. Posture shifts. If someone leans back in their chair after meeting your silence, they are creating distance, potentially stepping back from their position. If they lean forward, they may be escalating or pressing their point more firmly. Either tells you something important about where the conversation is going. Now, I want to give you a beautiful phrase to summarize all of this. During strategic silence, your job is not to think about what to say next. Your job is to listen with your whole body. Listen with your ears, yes, but also with your eyes, with your observations, and with your instincts. Silence gives you the space to do all of that, and the information you collect will make your next words 10 times more precise and 10 times more powerful. Let me give you a brief but very vivid practice scenario for this section, and then I want to tell you about something called the echo reflect technique, which is coming up in the next section, because it is one of the most elegant language tools I have ever learned, and I am genuinely excited to share it with you. Practice scenario: the vacuum effect in action. You are in a one-on-one meeting with a project stakeholder. Let us call her Sarah. Sarah has been resistant to a new process you have proposed for the team. She says, "I just don't think this new system is going to work. It's too complicated." Old response: reactive. "I understand your concern, Sarah, but I think if you give it a chance, you'll see it's actually quite simple once you get used to it. And I really think it's going to save us a lot of time in the long run." New response: strategic silence plus observation. You pause. You maintain calm, attentive eye contact. You count 3 to 4 seconds in your head. You take one quiet breath. Your face is neutral and engaged. Your posture is open. And you wait. Sarah, feeling the gentle pressure of that silence, keeps talking. "I mean, I've just seen so many of these systems come and go, and the learning curve always disrupts workflow. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I just worry about the timing." Now look at what just happened. Sarah has given you enormously valuable information. She is not actually opposed to the system itself. She is worried about the timing and the learning curve. Those are specific, addressable concerns, and you got them by saying nothing. Your response now becomes much more targeted. That makes a lot of sense, Sarah. Timing and transition are both really valid concerns. If we built a phased rollout that minimized disruption to the current workflow, would that address most of your hesitation? You have moved from a general disagreement to a specific solvable problem. And you did it because strategic silence gave Sarah the space to reveal what she actually meant. Now, before we move to the next section, I want to bridge to one of the most important ideas in this entire video. Because we have been talking a lot about silence and observation, and now it is time to talk about the other side of the coin. What happens when you start listening, really listening, with complete intention and strategy? Because what I am about to share with you is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about what it means to listen. Most people think listening is passive. Most people think listening is what you do while you wait for your turn to speak. But real listening, active listening used as a professional tool, is actually a form of leadership. And in the next section, I am going to show you exactly how to use it. But first, if you are finding this lesson helpful so far, I would love for you to take a quick second and hit the like button below. It genuinely helps more English learners find this content, and it tells me that you want more lessons like this one. Thank you so much for that. Now let's keep going. I want to start this section by dismantling a belief that almost everyone holds and that quietly limits almost everyone's professional effectiveness. The belief is this: listening is the passive half of a conversation, speaking is the active half. The person who listens is receiving, the person who speaks is leading. And this belief is almost entirely wrong. In reality, in any high stakes professional interaction, a negotiation, a performance review, a conflict resolution meeting, or a complex team discussion, the most powerful, most strategic, most influential person in the room is very often the one who is listening most carefully. Here is why. When you speak, you are giving information. You are revealing your position, your priorities, your emotional state, your weaknesses, and your desires. You are putting cards on the table. When you listen, truly, strategically listen, you are collecting information. You are learning the other person's position, their priorities, their emotional state, their weaknesses, and their desires. You are building a map of exactly how this conversation needs to go in order to reach the outcome you want. In other words, speaking puts you on the table, listening puts you at the controls. This is why I call active listening a power move. But here is the catch. There is a massive difference between ordinary listening, the kind that most people do, and active listening, the kind that the most effective communicators use as a deliberate strategic tool. Let me describe ordinary listening first, so we know exactly what we are moving away from. Ordinary listening looks like this. You hear the words the other person is saying, but most of your cognitive energy, most of your mental focus is actually spent on formulating your response. You are half listening to what they say and half constructing your counter argument, your explanation, or your next point. This is so common that there is actually a specific term for it in communication research: listening to respond, as opposed to listening to understand. When you listen to respond, you often miss crucial information. You miss the emotional undertone of what is being said. You miss qualifications and nuances. You miss the gaps between what someone says and what they mean. And you sometimes miss the most important word in the entire sentence because you were busy thinking about what you would say next. And in a professional conversation, every piece of information you miss is a missed opportunity. Active listening, by contrast, is completely different. Active listening means that your entire cognitive focus is directed outward, toward the speaker, toward their words, their tone, their non-verbal cues. You are not constructing your response at the same time. You are allowing yourself to fully absorb what is being communicated, words and everything else, before you begin to form a response. This is harder than it sounds. It requires real mental discipline. It requires you to trust that by the time the other person finishes speaking, you will have what you need to respond effectively. And with practice, that trust is completely warranted. Because active listening gives you so much better information to work with that your responses naturally become more effective. Now, let me give you a framework for how active listening actually works in practice. I call this the LARP framework. And no, it does not stand for live action role play. It stands for L. Listen with full attention. A. Acknowledge what you heard. R. Reflect and clarify. P. Probe with purpose. Let me explain each one. L. Listen with full attention. This means exactly what it sounds like, but let me add some specificity. Full attention means that your phone is face down or away from you. Your laptop is closed or turned away. Your eyes are on the speaker. Your internal monologue, that voice in your head that is constantly commenting, judging, and planning, is as quiet as you can make it. One technique that helps enormously here is what is sometimes called assumption suspension. This means you consciously set aside, at least temporarily, any assumptions or judgments you have already formed about the person or the situation. You approach what they are saying with a kind of open, curious neutrality. This is genuinely challenging in conflict situations because our natural tendency when someone challenges or criticizes us is to immediately start building our counter-argument. We hear the first few words of their criticism and our brain immediately starts constructing a defense, even before they have finished speaking. Assumption suspension requires you to consciously resist that impulse and instead stay curious. Let me hear everything they have to say before I decide what I think about it.
A. Acknowledge what you heard. This is where the verbal side of active listening begins. After the other person has finished speaking, or after a natural pause in their speech, you acknowledge what you heard. Not with a generic okay or I see, but with a specific, genuine reflection of what they said. Here are some example phrases for acknowledgement. So what I'm hearing is that your main concern is about the timeline, not the approach itself. Is that right? It sounds like the frustration here is less about the outcome and more about not feeling included in the decision-making process. If I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that the current system is workable, but the reporting function specifically isn't meeting your needs. Notice what these phrases do. They demonstrate that you have been genuinely listening. They show that you understand not just the words, but the meaning behind them. And they give the other person an opportunity to confirm or correct your understanding, which often leads to even more useful clarification. This acknowledgement step is also incredibly powerful from a relationship and de-escalation perspective. One of the most common reasons that professional conversations escalate into conflict is that people do not feel heard. They feel like they are talking, but no one is really listening. The moment you demonstrate clearly and specifically that you have actually heard what someone said, the emotional temperature of the conversation often drops significantly. The defensiveness decreases. The hostility softens. Why? Because the need to be heard is one of the deepest human psychological needs. When that need is met, even in a disagreement, people become significantly more open to finding solutions. R. Reflect and clarify. This is where we introduce one of the most powerful and elegant language tools in this entire lesson. I call it the echo-reflect technique. The echo-reflect technique is a specific form of mirroring, where you take a key word or phrase from what someone just said and you reflect it back to them in a way that invites them to expand on it. Let me show you how it works with an example. Imagine a colleague, let's call her Priya, says during a team retrospective, "I just think the whole project was mismanaged from the beginning. Nobody took ownership of the critical path and we ended up firefighting the entire time." A reactive response might be, "Well, I think that's a little unfair. There were a lot of external factors that contributed to the delays, and I don't think it's accurate to say nobody took ownership." Now this response might even be true, but it immediately creates defensiveness in Priya and in anyone else who is listening. It sets up an adversarial dynamic, and it shuts down the possibility of a real productive conversation. An echo-reflect response might look like this. "Mismanaged from the beginning. That's a strong statement, Priya. What specifically felt mismanaged to you? Was it the planning phase, the execution, or something else?" Notice what happened there. You took her keyword, mismanaged, and reflected it back to her, not in an aggressive way, but as a genuine inquiry. "Tell me more about what you mean by that." This does several things simultaneously. First, it signals to Priya that you heard her, specifically, not just generally. Second, it invites her to be more precise. Mismanaged is a broad, emotionally charged word. By asking her to specify what exactly she means, you are gently steering the conversation from emotional language to factual language, from subjective feeling to specific observable events. Third, and this is subtle but important, when Priya has to specify and be precise about her complaint, she often realizes, on her own, that the situation is more nuanced than her initial statement suggested. She might say, "Well, I guess specifically the resource allocation wasn't clear in the first 2 weeks." That is a very different statement from "the whole project was mismanaged from the beginning." And it is a much more manageable and addressable issue. You moved her there not by arguing with her, but by reflecting her own words back to her and inviting her to go deeper. This is the genius of the echo-reflect technique. You are not pushing back, you are not agreeing. You are creating a space where the other person naturally becomes more precise and more reasonable in their own thinking. Let me give you a few more echo-reflect examples so you can see the pattern clearly.
Statement. This proposal completely ignores the marketing team's input. Echo reflect. Completely ignores. That sounds significant. Can you help me understand which specific elements of the marketing team's input weren't reflected? Statement. Your deadline expectations are completely unrealistic. Echo reflect. Unrealistic. I want to understand that properly. What would a realistic timeline look like from your perspective, given your current workload? Statement. I feel like my contributions to this project aren't being recognized. Echo reflect. Your contributions not being recognized. That's important feedback. Can you share an example of a contribution that you felt went unnoticed? In each case, you are 1. Picking up a key word or phrase from their statement. 2. Repeating or paraphrasing it briefly. 3. Following immediately with an open-ended question that invites specificity. And the beauty is that this never sounds robotic or mechanical when done naturally. It sounds engaged, curious, and respectful, which is exactly what you want it to sound like. P. Probe with purpose. The final element of the LARP framework is probing, asking follow-up questions that deepen your understanding and steer the conversation in the direction that will lead to resolution. But here is the key word, purpose. Every question you ask should serve a specific purpose in the conversation. You are not asking questions randomly. You are not asking questions just to fill time. You are asking questions because the answers will give you information that you can use to move toward a solution. And there is a very important distinction between the types of questions available to you here. Closed questions invite a yes or no answer. Did you get the report on time? Were you happy with the outcome? These are fine for gathering specific confirmations, but they do not open up conversations, they close them down. Open-ended questions invite a fuller response. What was your experience of the report submission process? What aspects of the outcome worked well for you and what felt incomplete? These are the questions that generate rich information and productive conversation. In difficult professional conversations, you almost always want to be asking open-ended questions, especially during active listening. And there is a specific category of open-ended question that I want to spend some time on because it is particularly powerful in high-stakes situations. I call these impact questions. An impact question is an open-ended question that asks someone to describe the effect or consequence of a situation rather than just the situation itself. Here are some examples. Instead of, "Why didn't you tell me about the problem earlier?" ask, "What impact did waiting to raise this have on your ability to manage the project?" Instead of, "Why do you think the deadline was missed?" ask, "What did the missed deadline mean for the team's overall workload and priorities?" Instead of, "Why are you unhappy with the proposal?" ask, "How did the proposal as submitted fall short of what you needed to move forward with confidence?" Do you see the difference? Impact questions move the conversation from personal blame and historical "why did this happen" territory to practical consequence and effect territory. They invite the other person to think about outcomes and implications rather than defending or attacking positions. And they generate much richer, more actionable information. Now, I want to apply all of this, the LARP framework, the echo reflect technique, and impact questions to a full practice scenario. Because I think seeing it all in action together will really solidify your understanding. Full scenario. Performance feedback meeting. Context. You are a team leader. One of your team members, let us call him James, has come to you frustrated. He says, "I've been on this team for 2 years and I feel like I'm not growing. I keep getting the same kind of assignments and nobody ever considers me for the bigger projects. I'm honestly starting to wonder if this is even the right place for me." This is a high stakes conversation. James is talented and you do not want to lose him. But you also need to understand what is really driving his frustration before you can respond effectively. Here is how active listening guides the conversation. Step 1. Listen with full attention. You put down your pen, you close your laptop, you give James your complete attention. You let him finish without interrupting. You maintain calm, engaged eye contact. Step 2.
Acknowledge what you heard. James, thank you for telling me this directly. I know that probably wasn't easy to say. What I'm hearing is that you feel stuck in terms of your professional development and that the current assignment structure isn't giving you the kind of challenges you're looking for. Is that a fair summary?
Notice, you are not defending the assignment structure yet. You are not saying, well, I assign projects based on. You are first making absolutely sure James feels heard. Because if he does not feel heard, nothing else you say will land. Step 3. Reflect and clarify. Echo reflect. James says, yeah, exactly. I feel like I am invisible. You reflect. Invisible. That's a powerful word. What does that feel like day to day? Is it specific interactions or more a general sense that your contributions aren't being seen? James responds, honestly, it's more the bigger decisions. Like when the Henderson account came up last month, I found out from the team channel that someone else had been assigned to lead it. I thought I would have been considered. Now you have something specific. It is not a vague feeling of being overlooked. It is a specific instance, the Henderson account, where James felt bypassed. Step 4. Probe with purpose. Impact question. That's really useful context, James. Let me ask you this. If you had been given the opportunity to lead the Henderson account, what did you feel ready to bring to it that might not have been as visible to me from my perspective? This is an incredibly powerful question. It does two things simultaneously. First, it invites James to articulate his own competencies and readiness, which is empowering and clarifying for him. Second, it gives you genuine information about whether James's sense of readiness matches your own assessment and where the gap might lie. And notice, you have not yet said whether or not James would have been the right choice for the Henderson account. You have not defended your decision. You have not explained your reasoning. You have simply listened, reflected, acknowledged, and probed. And in doing so, you have gotten far more information than you could ever have gotten through a reactive, defensive conversation. Your response now, informed by everything you have learned through active listening, can be genuinely tailored to James's actual situation. Not a generic, I hear your concerns, but a precise, respectful, solution-oriented response. And that, my friends, is what leadership in a difficult conversation looks like. Now let me give you something important before we move on. In the next section, we are going to get into the specific language, the exact phrases and bridge scripts that you can use to navigate the most challenging moments in professional conversations. And I promise you, some of these phrases are so elegantly constructed that they will feel immediately useful the very first time you hear them. But first, I want to add one more dimension to our understanding of active listening, because there is an element we have not yet explored: tonal control. How you sound while you are actively listening and responding in a difficult conversation matters enormously. We are not just talking about the words, we are talking about your vocal tone, your pace, your inflection, and your volume. Here is the core principle. In a high-tension conversation, your tone of voice is like a mirror for the emotional temperature of the room. If you speak loudly and quickly, you escalate the tension. If you speak softly and slowly, you de-escalate it. Elite communicators use what is called a de-escalation tone in conflict situations. This is a voice that is lower in pitch, not unnaturally deep, but avoiding the rising pitch that often accompanies anxiety or defensiveness. Slower in pace, deliberate and measured, not rushed. Every word lands with intention. Steady in volume, neither whispered nor raised. Confident and calm. Warm in resonance, meaning there is a genuine quality of care and engagement in the voice, not coldness or clinical distance. Here is a helpful image to hold in your mind. Think of a doctor delivering complicated medical information to a patient. A good doctor does not rush. They do not speak loudly. Their voice is steady, warm, and clear. They allow pauses. They check in with the patient. Does that make sense so far? They are absolutely in control of the emotional tone of the conversation, even when the information they are delivering is difficult. That is the energy you want in a difficult professional conversation, not the energy of a debate, the energy of a trusted, calm, competent professional who is fully present and genuinely committed to finding a solution. And I want to give you one practical technique for tonal control that many professional communication coaches use, what they call speaking from your chest. When we are nervous or anxious, our breathing becomes shallow, which means the sound we produce comes from our throat or even just from our mouth. This produces a higher, thinner, more anxious sounding voice. When we breathe deeply, filling our lungs fully, the sound we produce comes from deeper in our chest. This produces a lower, richer, more resonant, more authoritative voice. So one of the simplest practical tips for sounding calm and composed in a difficult conversation is this. Before you speak, take one deep breath, filling your lungs completely, and speak from that breath. The physical act of deep breathing naturally lowers your voice's pitch and pace, and the resulting sound signals confidence and composure. This works. It sounds too simple, but it genuinely works. Try it right now, wherever you are. Take a deep breath, fill your lungs, and say your name out loud. Now compare that to saying your name in a shallow, anxious breath. Hear the difference? That difference is what your colleagues, managers, and clients hear when you are in a high-stakes conversation. And with practice, speaking from a deep, controlled breath can become your natural default, not just a technique you use in emergencies. We are going to build on everything we have covered so far. The rhythmic pause, the vacuum effect, the LARP framework, the echo reflect technique, and tonal control as we move into the next section. But stay with me, because what comes next is where everything gets extremely practical. We are talking language, specific phrases, scripts you can actually use, and I cannot wait to walk you through them. Everything we have covered up to this point has been building toward this moment. We have talked about the psychology of why difficult conversations feel so urgent and so threatening. We have explored the power of silence and what your body should be doing during those pauses. We have broken down active listening as a diagnostic tool, not a passive act. And we have introduced specific techniques like the echo reflect method and impact questions. Now it is time to talk about language. Specific, practical, real language. Because here is the thing, even if you understand every concept perfectly, even if your body language is composed and your tone is de-escalated, you still need words. You still need the right words in the right order, delivered in the right way. And for English learners especially, having a bank of powerful, natural-sounding professional phrases ready to use is absolutely transformative. So in this section, we are going to build that bank. And by the end of this section, you are going to have a collection of what I call bridge scripts. Specific language tools that you can adapt and use in a wide range of difficult professional situations. Let me start by talking about one of the most important shifts in thinking that high-level professional communicators make when approaching conflict. Most people, when they enter a conflict or disagreement at work, frame the situation as me versus you. There is a winner and a loser. Someone is right and someone is wrong. The goal is to prove your point and defeat the other person's argument. This framing, while extremely common, is almost always counterproductive. It creates defensiveness, it entrenches positions, it generates resentment, even when one person wins. And it very rarely leads to the kind of lasting collaborative solutions that actually serve the organization well. Elite communicators use a completely different framing. Instead of me versus you, they frame the conversation as us versus the problem. We are not on opposite sides of this issue. We are on the same side, looking at a shared problem together. And our goal is to find the best solution for everyone involved. This reframe, which linguists and conflict resolution specialists call a collaborative frame, has a profound effect on the emotional atmosphere of the conversation. And the language you use is the tool that creates this frame. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Me versus you framing. I think your assessment of the budget is wrong. The numbers I submitted were accurate, and I don't understand why you're questioning them. Us versus the problem framing. I want to make sure we're working from the same data here. There seems to be a discrepancy between the numbers in my submission and what you're seeing. Can we take a few minutes to trace where that gap might have come from? Same basic message. There is a disagreement about budget numbers, but the second version does not assign blame or accusation, positions both parties as working toward the same goal, accurate numbers, uses we language instead of I versus you language, frames the disagreement as a solvable puzzle, not a personal conflict, invites collaboration rather than triggering defensiveness. Now, this might feel like a small thing, just word choices, right? But in the high-pressure, status-sensitive environment of a professional workplace, these word choices can make an enormous difference. Let me now introduce you to 3 categories of bridge scripts, each designed for a different type of difficult professional conversation. Category 1. Bridge scripts for receiving difficult feedback. Receiving feedback, especially critical or unexpected feedback, is one of the most emotionally challenging situations professionals face. Whether it is a performance review that does not go as expected, a public critique from a colleague, or a concerned observation from your manager, the instinct is always the same: to defend, to justify, to explain. And as we have discussed, that instinct, while completely natural, is almost never the most effective response. Here are bridge scripts specifically designed for receiving difficult feedback with composure and strategic intelligence. Bridge script 1. The clarifying pause. Thank you for that feedback. I want to make sure I'm receiving it in the right spirit. Can you help me understand specifically what you'd like to see different going forward? Why this works? It acknowledges the feedback without agreeing or disagreeing. It signals maturity and a genuine interest in improvement. And the follow-up question forces the feedback giver to move from evaluation, "This was wrong," to direction, "Here is what better looks like." That transition from judgment to guidance is almost always more productive. Bridge script 2. The separation statement. I hear the concern and I want to engage with it seriously. I may see parts of this situation differently and I'd like to share that perspective. But first, can you walk me through the specific observations that led to this assessment? Why this works? It signals openness without capitulation. It says, I am going to take your feedback seriously while also asserting I have my own perspective and it matters. And asking for specific observations moves the conversation from interpretation and evaluation to evidence and facts, which is always a more productive space. Bridge script 3. The reflective reframe. That's a fair challenge. What I'm taking from what you've said is that the priority right now is X. If I've understood that correctly, here's how I see a path forward. Why this works. It uses the echo-reflect technique at scale. You are reflecting back not just the word, but the core message of the feedback, demonstrating that you have genuinely processed it. And the immediate pivot to, here's a path forward, positions you as a solutions-oriented professional rather than a defensive one. Bridge script 4. The grounding statement. Before I respond, I want to acknowledge that I've heard what you're saying. I'm going to take a moment to make sure my response addresses the real concern here. Why this works? This is essentially a verbalized version of the rhythmic pause. It buys you a moment to think while signaling to the other person that you are taking their input seriously. It is simple, honest, and remarkably effective in de-escalating emotional conversations. Category 2. Bridge scripts for contract disputes and negotiation. Friction negotiations, whether over project scope, deadlines, budget, or contractual terms, are another context where the right language can mean the difference between a collaborative agreement and a destructive standoff. Here are Brit scripts designed specifically for negotiation and contractual friction. Brit Script 5, the common ground anchor. Before we get into the specifics of where we see things differently, I'd like to take a moment to establish what we both agree on. We're both invested in shared goal. If that's our common ground, then the question becomes, what's the best way to get there given the constraints we each have? Why this works? In any negotiation or dispute, people get lost in their differences very quickly. This script deliberately drags the conversation back to what both parties actually share, a desired outcome, before engaging with the disagreements. This shifts the psychological frame of the conversation from competitive to collaborative, which makes every subsequent exchange more productive. Bridge Script 6, the precision request. I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're asking for. If I hear you correctly, your position is X. Is that right? And if so, can you help me understand what's driving that specific requirement? That way, I can look at whether there are alternative ways to address the underlying need. Why this works? This is a masterfully constructed sentence. It uses active listening, summarizing their position, echo reflect, reflecting it back for confirmation, and an impact question, asking about the underlying need rather than the stated position. Distinguishing between a position and an underlying need is a cornerstone of Harvard negotiation theory. People's stated positions are often not the same as their actual interests. And once you understand the interest, you often find creative solutions that both parties can accept. Bridge Script 7, the boundary frame. I absolutely want to find a way to work through this with you. And I also need to be honest with you about what is and isn't workable for us. What I can commit to is X. What I am not in a position to offer is Y. And here's why. Reason. With those parameters in place, what do you think is the most viable path forward? Why this works? This script does something that many professionals find very difficult. It sets a clear boundary while remaining genuinely open to collaboration. The structure is commitment, limitation, reasoning, and then an open-ended invitation to problem solve together. It is honest, professional, and respectful. And the final question puts the problem-solving responsibility back into the room. You are not refusing to collaborate. You are defining the parameters within which collaboration can happen. Bridge Script 8, the data invitation. I want to make sure we are not just comparing perspectives here. I think it'll help to look at the specifics. Can we put our respective data on the table and see where the numbers are actually aligned and where they diverge? Why this works? In any dispute about facts, timelines, or financial figures, emotion can override evidence very quickly. This script gently but firmly redirects the conversation from feelings and opinions to data and evidence. And it does it collaboratively. Not, your numbers are wrong, but let's look at both our numbers together. This is both more accurate and far less inflammatory. Category 3. Bridge scripts for performance reviews and workplace conflicts. Performance reviews and interpersonal workplace conflicts are perhaps the most emotionally charged of all professional conversations. They involve ego, identity, livelihoods, and relationships. They require the most careful and the most sophisticated use of language. Here are bridge scripts for these most sensitive contexts. Bridge Script 9, the empathy anchor. I can hear that this situation has been genuinely frustrating, and I don't want to minimize that. I also think there's a way forward here that addresses the core issue. Can we spend a few minutes on that? Why this works. In high emotion conversations, people need to feel that their emotional experience is acknowledged before they can engage with practical solutions. This script provides that acknowledgement directly and genuinely, and then immediately pivots to problem solving. The word genuinely is important here. It signals that you are not dismissing the emotion but taking it seriously. Bridge Script 10. the perspective bridge. I want to understand this from your side completely before I share my perspective. Walk me through how this situation developed from where you were standing. Why this works. This script is pure active listening in a script form. It explicitly positions you as someone who wants to understand first, respond second. And from where you were standing is a beautifully spatial metaphor that invites the other person to share their genuine subjective experience without judgment. It is almost impossible to respond defensively to this prompt. Bridge script 11. The shared ownership statement. I think there are things both of us could have done differently in this situation, and I'd rather focus on what we do going forward than spend time assigning blame backward. What would it look like for us to handle a situation like this better next time? Why this works? This script acknowledges that most workplace conflicts are not one-sided. Rarely is one person entirely at fault and the other entirely innocent. By naming that shared responsibility without assigning specific blame, you create a more honest and more productive atmosphere. And by asking, what would it look like going forward? You move from the past, which cannot be changed, to the future, which can. Bridge script 12. The documentation bridge. I want to make sure that everything we've agreed on today is captured clearly, so we are both working from the same understanding going forward. Can we take 5 minutes to summarize the key points and any action items before we close this conversation? Why this works. In difficult professional conversations, especially ones that involve conflict or negotiation, one of the most common follow-up problems is misremembered agreements. People walk out of the same conversation with different understandings of what was decided. This script prevents that problem before it starts, and it does so in a way that positions you as thorough, organized, and committed to follow through. It is professional and practical. Now, I want to introduce you to a category of questions that we touched on briefly in the last section, but that deserves a much deeper exploration here. I am talking about open-ended impact questions, and these are, in my opinion, one of the most powerful language tools available to a professional communicator. We already touched on impact questions, questions that ask about the effect or consequence of something rather than just its cause or history. Let me now give you a deeper set of these, organized by the type of difficult conversation you might face. Open-ended impact questions for conflict resolution. What has been the impact of this situation on your ability to do your best work? If this issue isn't addressed, what do you see happening to the team's dynamic over the next quarter? Looking at where we are right now, what would resolution look like for you specifically? What would need to change for you to feel confident about the direction we're heading? If we handle this situation exactly right from here on out, what would that look like in practice? Open-ended impact questions for negotiation. If we couldn't meet that specific deadline, what would the downstream impact be for your team? If this budget figure isn't achievable, what are the areas where you have the most flexibility? What's the most important outcome for you from this agreement? And what are the areas where you have more latitude? If we scale back the scope to fit the budget, which elements are non-negotiable versus nice to have? Open-ended impact questions for feedback conversations. What would success look like to you if this was handled perfectly going forward? What would help you feel more confident about this area over the next 3 months? In terms of professional development, what kind of challenge do you feel most ready for right now? If you could change one thing about how our team communicates around project priorities, what would it be? Notice the common thread in all of these questions. They are forward-facing. They focus on solutions, possibilities, and futures rather than past mistakes and historical blame. They invite the other person to think constructively and creatively. And they almost always generate more useful information than questions that focus on why did this happen or whose fault was this. That forward-facing orientation is one of the most important characteristics of sophisticated professional communication. Now, I want to pause here and share something with you that I think is genuinely important for your English learning journey. If you are enjoying this lesson and finding these phrases and concepts useful, I want to encourage you to do something right now. Pause this video, take out a notebook or open a notes app on your phone and write down at least 5 of the bridge scripts we have covered so far. Not because you will memorize them perfectly, but because the act of writing them down begins the process of making them yours. The goal is not to remember these phrases word for word and recite them robotically. The goal is to absorb the structure, the logic, and the spirit of these phrases so that over time you develop your own version of them, naturally and authentically. And speaking of developing your natural English skills, if you are enjoying this lesson, I would love for you to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more English learning videos just like this one. Your support genuinely helps us create more high quality content, and every like and subscription tells us that this kind of deep, practical English learning is what you want. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Also, if you want even more English listening and speaking practice, be sure to check out our podcast playlist right here on this channel. You will find many useful lessons designed to help you improve your English naturally through real conversation, real stories, and real professional contexts, just like what we are doing today. Now, let me give you one more set of advanced language tools before we move into our final section on mastering the resolution. These are what I call tonal reframes. A tonal reframe is a specific type of phrase that you use to acknowledge the emotional weight of what has been said and then gently redirect the energy of the conversation from reactivity to resolution. Here are some of the most powerful tonal reframes in professional English. From accusation to inquiry. Instead of responding to "you never communicate timeline changes," say "timeline communication is clearly really important to you, and I think it should be. Can we talk about what a better process might look like going forward?" From defensiveness to ownership. Instead of responding to "this project was a failure," say "there were definitely things that didn't go the way we planned. I want to understand exactly what fell short and what my role in that was so we can do better next time." From emotional to practical. Instead of matching the emotion in "I'm tired of this team not respecting my expertise," say "feeling respected and valued is essential to doing good work, and I hear that's been missing. What would respect for your expertise actually look like in our day-to-day workflow?" In each case, you are not dismissing the emotion, you are honoring it. And then you are redirecting the energy towards something actionable and constructive. This is what de-escalation without capitulation means in practice. You are not surrendering your position. You are not agreeing with criticisms that may be unfair. You are simply choosing to engage with the emotional reality of the person in front of you, and then steering that energy toward productivity. That is not weakness, that is leadership. Now, everything we have built, the psychological framework, the silence mechanics, the active listening tools, the bridge scripts, the impact questions, and the tonal reframes, everything comes together in the final section. Because knowing all of these tools is one thing, but how do you use them to close a difficult conversation? How do you land the plane? How do you bring everything to a resolution that makes everyone feel heard, that asserts your leadership, and that moves the situation forward with clarity and purpose? That is what we are about to explore. And if you have been with me all the way to this point, first of all, congratulations. You have demonstrated exactly the kind of patience and commitment that makes great communicators great. And what is coming next is, I believe, the most satisfying part of everything we have covered today. We have arrived at what I consider the most important and most satisfying part of our journey together today. Think about it this way. Everything we have covered up to this point has been about building. We built an understanding of why urgency is an illusion, We built the skill of strategic silence. They built the framework of active listening. We built a toolkit of language, bridge scripts, impact questions, echo reflect techniques, and tonal reframes. All of that building was preparation. Preparation for this moment, the moment of resolution. Because the mark of a truly skilled communicator is not just how they handle the difficult middle of a conversation. It is how they bring that conversation to a close. How they synthesize everything that has been said, acknowledged, challenged, and explored, and shape it into a moment of genuine closure, clarity, and forward momentum. And that is what this section is all about. Let me start by painting you a picture of what masterful resolution looks like, and then we will break down exactly how to achieve it. Imagine you have just been through a difficult 1-hour meeting with a colleague about a disputed project responsibility. At various points, voices were raised, positions were firmly held. There was frustration, perhaps some hurt feelings, and certainly some significant disagreement. But throughout the conversation, you used the tools we have discussed. You used strategic silence to slow the pace when tension was rising. You used active listening to genuinely understand your colleague's perspective. You used echo reflect to demonstrate that you heard them. You used bridge scripts to keep the conversation collaborative. You used impact questions to move from emotion to evidence. And now, as the meeting reaches its natural end, there is a moment, a pivotal moment, where the conversation needs to be closed. What does a masterful resolution sound like in that moment? It sounds something like this. Before we close, I want to make sure we capture what we've actually arrived at today. From everything you've shared, I understand that your core concern is X, and that's a legitimate concern that I want to make sure we address directly. From my side, the key priority is Y. I think we've found some real common ground today around Z, and here's what I'd like to propose as our way forward. We do specific action by specific timeline, and we schedule a check-in in 2 weeks to make sure we are both satisfied with how things are developing. Does that capture where we've landed? Let me pull this apart because there is a lot of precision packed into that one closing statement. First, you signal the close. Before we close, which shifts the energy from debate to resolution. People's posture literally changes when they hear those words. The body relaxes slightly. The mind begins transitioning from conflict mode to conclusion mode. Second, you summarize what you heard from the other person, specifically and accurately. This final act of active listening is enormously powerful at the close of a difficult conversation. It demonstrates that everything the other person said was genuinely heard and genuinely matters. It validates their participation. Third, you state your own core priority. Clearly, without apology and without defensiveness. Not in opposition to theirs, but alongside theirs. Two legitimate perspectives, both acknowledged. Fourth, you name the common ground, the area of agreement that emerged from the conversation. This is important because even in the most contentious conversations, there is almost always something both parties agree on. Naming it explicitly anchors the resolution in reality, not just in vague goodwill. Fifth, you make a specific, concrete proposal. Action plus timeline plus accountability. Not, let's keep talking about this. Not, we'll figure it out. Specific, actionable, measurable. Sixth, you invite confirmation. Does that capture where we've landed? This gives the other person one more opportunity to feel heard and to participate in the resolution. It positions the closure as a shared achievement, not something you are imposing. This is what I call an assertive resolution statement, and it is one of the most powerful things you can learn to do in a professional communication context. Let me give you a full template for this statement that you can adapt for your own use. The assertive resolution statement template. Before we close out today, I want to take a moment to make sure we are both on the same page about where we've landed. From what I've heard from you today, the most important things for you are key concern 1 and key concern 2. I want to acknowledge those directly. From my side, the priorities I've been working from are your priority 1 and your priority 2. I think we've made real progress today, and I believe we found agreement on area of shared agreement. Here's what I'd like to propose as our next step: specific action. I'd suggest we accountability mechanism, for example, follow up by a specific date, document this in writing, schedule a check-in. Does that feel like a fair summary of where we are? And is there anything I've missed that you want to make sure is captured before we finish? This template is intentionally comprehensive. You may not need every element in every conversation. Sometimes the resolution is simpler and the language can be briefer. But having this full structure in your mind ensures that nothing important gets left out and that the conversation closes with clarity and mutual respect. Now, let me talk about something that I call the feedback loop protocol. Because one of the most common failures of difficult professional conversations, even ones that go relatively well in the moment, is that nothing concrete happens afterward. The conversation ends, people go back to their desks, and within days, the agreements made in the meeting have faded into ambiguity. The same problems resurface, the same conflicts re-emerge. The feedback loop protocol is designed to prevent exactly that. Here is how it works. Step 1. Document the resolution. Within 24 hours of any difficult professional conversation, especially one that involved conflict, negotiation, or important feedback, you send a brief, clear follow-up message to all parties involved. This is not a long email. It does not need to be formal or elaborate, but it should capture the key concerns or issues that were raised, the areas of agreement that were reached, the specific action items that were agreed upon, the timeline for those action items, the schedule follow-up if there is one. Here is an example of what such a follow-up message might sound like. Hi name, thank you for our conversation today. I wanted to capture the key points we discussed to make sure we're aligned as we move forward. Main concerns discussed, summary of key issues, what we agreed on, areas of agreement, action items. We will do X by Y date. Follow up, we agreed to check in on date to review progress. Please let me know if I've missed anything or if you'd like to add anything to this summary. Looking forward to making progress on this together. This kind of follow-up serves several important functions. First, it holds everyone accountable to what was actually agreed, including yourself. Second, it prevents the kind of, but that's not what I thought we agreed to, conversation from happening 2 weeks later. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it signals to the other party that you are someone who takes conversation seriously and follows through on what they said. That kind of professional reliability is a significant trust builder over time. Step 2. Monitor and check in. At the agreed check-in point, you revisit the documented agreements. Are the action items on track? Has the situation improved? Are there any new issues that have surfaced? This follow-up conversation is almost always much easier and much more productive than the original difficult conversation. Partly because trust has been built and partly because there is now a concrete framework to anchor the conversation in. Step 3. Acknowledge progress explicitly. When things do improve, when the action items are completed, when the situation gets better, when the conflict resolves, say so. Explicitly, publicly, where appropriate. This sounds obvious, but many professionals forget to close the feedback loop in a positive direction. They address the problem, they did the follow-up, but they never explicitly said, hey, I noticed that the timeline communication has been much better this month. I really appreciate the effort you've put into that. This acknowledgement does two things. It validates the effort the other person made to change or improve, and it reinforces the specific behavior you want to see continue. In behavioral psychology, this is called positive reinforcement, and it is one of the most powerful tools for shaping lasting professional behavior. Now I want to shift to something that might surprise you, because it is about you. Not just your performance in difficult conversations, but your long-term development as a communicator. All of the techniques we have discussed today, the rhythmic pause, the vacuum effect, the LARP framework, the echo reflect technique, the bridge scripts, the assertive resolution statement, none of these become natural overnight. None of them are instinctive from the beginning. They are skills. And like all skills, they require practice. Not just theoretical understanding, not just watching videos and reading books. Actual, lived practice. The problem, of course, is that you cannot practice your high stakes professional communication skills in the middle of your most high stakes professional conversations. That would be like learning to play piano for the first time at a concert performance. The stakes are too high, the pressure is too intense, and mistakes in those moments can have real consequences. This is why the concept of low stakes practice is so essential. And I want to give you a very concrete blueprint for how to build the muscle memory for these techniques in everyday low stakes situations, so that when you need them in high stakes situations, they are completely natural. The low stakes practice blueprint. Practice 1. The daily pause. Choose one conversation per day. It does not have to be a difficult one, where you deliberately practice the rhythmic pause. Before you respond to any question or comment, pause for 3 seconds. Use a bridging phrase. Notice how it feels. Notice how it affects the conversation. Do this for one conversation per day, and within 2 weeks, the pause will start to feel natural rather than forced. Start with low stakes conversations. A lunch conversation with a friend, a casual meeting with a friendly colleague, a discussion with a family member. The content does not matter. What matters is building the physical and mental habit of pausing before responding. Practice 2. The Echo Reflect Daily Drill. In every conversation today, personal or professional, find at least one opportunity to use the Echo Reflect technique. Pick up one keyword from what someone says, reflect it back, and ask a follow-up question. You said you were frustrated with the project timeline. What specifically has been the most frustrating part? Do this in casual conversations first. It will feel slightly awkward in the beginning because it is a new pattern. But very quickly, people will start responding positively because they will feel genuinely heard, and that positive response will reinforce the habit. Practice 3. The Bridge Script Rehearsal. Take 3 or 4 of the bridge scripts we covered today, the ones that feel most relevant to your professional context, and practice saying them out loud. Literally out loud by yourself. This sounds strange, but it is enormously effective. Why? Because one of the biggest barriers to using sophisticated language in real-time professional conversations is that if you have never said those words out loud before, they feel unfamiliar and awkward when you try to produce them under pressure. But if you have said them out loud 20 times in the privacy of your own room, they start to feel natural. The words become yours. You can do this in the car on the way to work, in the shower, on your lunch break, anytime and any place where you have a few minutes alone. Just practice saying the phrases out loud until they feel smooth and natural coming out of your mouth. Practice 4. The post-conversation review. After any significant professional conversation, meeting, review, negotiation, difficult exchange, take 5 minutes to review it in your mind. Ask yourself, where did I feel the illusion of urgency most strongly? Did I manage it well? Did I use strategic silence anywhere? Was there a moment where I could have used it more effectively? Did I listen actively, or did I spend most of the conversation thinking about my response? Did I use any of the techniques or phrases we discussed? How did they land? What would I do differently next time? This reflective practice, which coaches sometimes call deliberate reflection, is one of the most powerful accelerators of professional skill development. It turns every conversation you have into a learning opportunity, not just the ones that go perfectly. Practice 5. Role play with a partner. If you have a trusted colleague, a mentor, or a friend who is also interested in improving their professional communication skills, consider occasional role play practice. This sounds uncomfortable for many people, and I understand that. But even 1 or 2 sessions of deliberately practicing a difficult conversation, taking turns playing both roles, can produce remarkable improvements in real-time performance. You can use any of the scenarios we discussed today as a starting point. Or you can create scenarios based on real situations you have faced or are currently facing. The goal is simply to give yourself a safe, low stakes space to try the techniques, make mistakes, and refine your approach. Now, I want to spend a moment on something that I think is often underestimated in professional communication development, and that is the role of self compassion. Learning to communicate more skillfully in difficult situations is genuinely challenging work. It requires you to change deeply ingrained habits, habits that have been forming since childhood. It requires you to manage strong physiological stress responses in real time. And it requires you to think carefully about language and behavior at the very moments when thinking carefully feels most difficult. You will not get this right every time. Nobody does. Even the most experienced, most skilled professional communicators have conversations that do not go the way they planned. Moments where they lose their composure. Moments where they say something they later regret. Moments where they miss an opportunity to use a technique that would have made the conversation much better. That is not failure. That is being human. The goal is not perfection. The goal is consistent, intentional improvement. And consistent, intentional improvement happens over time. Not in one conversation, not in 1 week, but across many months and years of committed practice. So please be patient with yourself. Celebrate the small wins. Celebrate the moment you remember to pause before responding, even if your response wasn't perfect. Celebrate the moment you use one echo reflect question in a conversation, even if you forgot all the other techniques. Celebrate the moment you send a professional follow-up email after a difficult meeting, even if the meeting itself felt clumsy and uncomfortable. Every one of those moments is a step forward. And steps forward, one at a time, are how real transformation happens. Let me now bring together everything we have covered today into one final, complete scenario. A scenario that demonstrates all 5 sections of our lesson working together in a single professional conversation. Because I want you to see how this all flows as one integrated approach, not a collection of separate techniques. The complete scenario. A complex team conflict context. You are a mid-level manager. Two of your team members, Sarah and Marcus, have had an ongoing conflict about whose responsibility it is to manage the client communication for a major account. It has been affecting the team's morale and the client relationship. You have called a three-way meeting to address it directly. Sarah begins. Mano, I've been handling this client for 6 months. Marcus keeps going directly to the client without running it through me first, and it's creating confusion. I don't know what he's telling them, and it's making me look unprepared in my own meetings with them. Marcus responds immediately. That's not fair. I've only reached out directly when you weren't available, and the client was waiting for a response. You can't be the bottleneck for every single client communication. The room is tense. Both Sarah and Marcus are frustrated. Both feel they are in the right. Here is how you, using everything we have covered today, navigate this moment. I can hear that this situation has been genuinely frustrating for both of you, and I appreciate you both being willing to have this conversation directly. Before I say anything else, I want to make sure I understand what each of you is dealing with. Sarah, you said Marcus going directly to the client is making you look unprepared. Can you walk me through a specific instance where that happened? Sarah, sure. Last Tuesday, Marcus told the client that we were planning to push the Q3 deliverable back by 2 weeks. I didn't know about that. When I got on a call with the client that afternoon, they referenced a conversation I knew nothing about. It was incredibly embarrassing. A deliverable change that you weren't looped into and that reached the client before it reached you. I can absolutely see why that was a difficult situation, Sarah. Marcus, what was your understanding of why you made that call directly? Marcus, we had a team message saying that timeline was shifting. I thought everyone knew. And Sarah was in back-to-back meetings. The client needed an answer. I was trying to be responsive. So from where you were standing, Marcus, this was about being responsive to the client when there was a time-sensitive need. And Sarah, from where you were standing, This was about maintaining clear ownership and coordination. Both of those things are legitimate. And I think the real issue here is that we don't have a clear protocol for how client communication flows when there's a time constraint. Is that a fair read of the situation? Sarah and Marcus both nod or agree in some form. You. Good, because I don't think this is actually about either of you doing something wrong. I think it's about a gap in our process, and that's something we can fix. Let me ask both of you. If you were designing an ideal client communication protocol from scratch, what would the key elements be? What do you each need from the system to do your job well? The both Sarah and Marcus contributing ideas for a shared solution. You. Assertive resolution statement. Okay, I think we've made real progress here today. Here's what I'm hearing as our agreed approach going forward. Sarah, you remain the primary point of contact for client communication, and all substantive updates go through you. Marcus, if there's a time-sensitive situation and Sarah is not available, you confirm with her by message or email before reaching out to the client. Even a two-line message. Heading to client now, need to address X, okay to proceed? Does that feel workable for both of you? I'll send a brief summary of what we've agreed today by end of day so we all have it in writing. And I'd like us to check in as a group in 3 weeks to see how it's going. Does that sound fair? Notice how this entire conversation demonstrates every element we have covered. The rhythmic pause at the beginning, buying you time to assess the room. Strategic silence that avoided escalating the initial conflict. The LALP framework. Listening with full attention, acknowledging both perspectives, reflecting through echo-reflect, and probing with impact questions. The tonal reframe that shifted the conversation from personal blame to systemic gap. The bridge script, common ground anchor, that moved both parties from opposition to collaboration. The assertive resolution statement that closed the conversation with clarity, specificity, and mutual ownership. The feedback loop protocol commitments, a written summary and a follow-up check-in. That is what mastery looks like. Not perfect, not robotic, but intentional, strategic, compassionate, and clear. And now, before I close out today's lesson, I want to give you a set of English vocabulary words and phrases that we have used throughout this lesson, because reviewing these will help you as a language learner to internalize not just the communication techniques, but the actual English vocabulary that goes with them. Key vocabulary and phrases from today's lesson. Strategic silence. Deliberate, purposeful use of pausing in a conversation. Illusion of urgency. The false feeling that you must respond immediately. Rhythmic pause. A consistent, intentional pause before responding. Cortisol. The stress hormone released in fight or flight situations. Prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking. Vacuum effect, the tendency for silence to pull words out of the other person. Micro expressions, tiny, involuntary facial expressions that reveal emotion. Embodied composure, using physical posture to support emotional calm. LARP framework. Listen, acknowledge, reflect, probe. Echo reflect technique. Mirroring a keyword and inviting the speaker to expand. Impact questions. Open-ended questions about consequences and effects. Bridge scripts. Ready to use phases for difficult professional conversations. Collaborative frame. Framing a conflict as us versus the problem, not me versus you. Tonal reframe. Using language to shift the emotional energy of a conversation. Assertive resolution statement. A structured closing that summarizes, asserts, and proposes. Feedback loop protocol. A follow-up system to ensure agreements are documented and followed. De-escalation tone. A vocal quality that reduces emotional tension. Assumption suspension. Consciously setting aside judgments to listen fully.
Deliberate reflection. Reviewing past conversations to identify learning opportunities. Position versus interest. Distinguishing between what someone says they want and what they actually need. Each of these phrases is valuable English vocabulary that you can use in professional settings. I encourage you to review this list, practice using these words in your own sentences, and notice when you encounter them in English podcasts, articles, or conversations. Now, before I share my final closing words with you today, I want to do something special. I want to give you one complete bridge script scenario as a bonus, a scenario specifically designed for English learners who are navigating professional conversations in a second language. Because I know that for many of you watching this, there is an extra layer of challenge. You are not just managing the emotional difficulty of a hard professional conversation, you are also managing that in a language that is not your first language. And that extra cognitive load, processing English while managing emotion and strategy at the same time, is genuinely demanding. So here is a bridge script specifically for moments when you need to buy time in an English conversation while your mind is catching up. Bridge scripts for English learners in professional conversations. Could you give me a moment to make sure I'm expressing this clearly? I want to get the language right. I want to make sure I fully understand what you're saying before I respond. Could you explain that one more time? That's a complex point, and I want to make sure my response does it justice. Let me think for a moment. I'm going to take a second to organize my thoughts on this. It's an important question, and I want to be precise. Before I respond, I want to confirm I've understood correctly. You're saying summary, is that right? These phrases are beautiful because they do two things simultaneously. They buy you genuine thinking time, which, as an English learner, you genuinely need. And they signal professionalism and intellectual seriousness. They make you look more thoughtful, not less capable. I have seen English learners use these kinds of phrases in professional settings and completely command the room. Not despite the pause, but because of it. Because in those moments, they were modeling exactly the kind of deliberate, thoughtful communication that marks the most effective professionals in any language. We have covered an extraordinary amount of ground today, and I am genuinely proud of every single one of you who stayed with me through this entire lesson. That kind of commitment to your growth, both as an English speaker and as a professional communicator, is something worth celebrating. Let me take a moment to bring everything together with a brief, clear summary of what we have learned. In section 1, we discovered the illusion of urgency, the false belief that you must respond immediately in high-stakes conversations. We learned that this impulse is driven by cortisol and the fight or flight response, and that even a 3 to 5 second rhythmic pause can transform a reactive response into a strategic one. In section 2, we explored the mechanics of strategic silence, how the vacuum effect works, what your body language should look like during a pause, and how to observe the other person's non-verbal cues while you create space in the conversation. In section 3, we completely reimagined active listening as a power move, a diagnostic tool, not a passive act. We built the LARP framework, introduced the echo-reflect technique, and explored how impact questions move conversations from emotion to evidence and from the past to the future. In section 4, we built our toolkit of language with bridge scripts for every major difficult professional scenario: receiving feedback, navigating negotiations, managing workplace conflicts, and maintaining boundaries with grace and authority. And in section 5, we put it all together with the assertive resolution statement, the feedback loop protocol, and a complete blueprint for low-stakes practice that will build your communication skills over time. And here is the one idea I want to leave you with, the most important thing you can take away from today's lesson. The best professional communicators are not the ones with the fastest responses. They are not the ones with the most words. They are not the ones who talk the loudest or the longest. They are the ones who are most fully present, who listen with their whole being, who trust the power of a pause, who choose their words with intention, who make every person in the room feel heard, even while asserting their own perspective with quiet, confident authority. That is not a personality type. That is not something you are born with. It is a skill. And skills are built through knowledge, practice, and time. You now have the knowledge. The practice begins today. And the time, well, that is something that comes one conversation at a time. Every difficult conversation you face from this point forward is no longer just a challenge. It is an opportunity. An opportunity to practice silence, to model composure, to listen actively, and to communicate with the kind of precision and warmth that marks true professional leadership. I believe in your ability to do this. In fact, the very fact that you have invested this time in learning and growing tells me that you already have what it takes. So go into your next difficult conversation with confidence. Breathe, pause, listen, and then speak with purpose. And remember, you are not learning English just to survive in professional settings. You are learning English to lead. Thank you so much for being here today. This lesson has been a genuine pleasure to create for you, and I hope you carry something meaningful from it into your work and your life. If you enjoyed this lesson, please take a moment right now to like this video and share it with someone who might benefit from it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. We have many more powerful English learning lessons planned, and I don't want you to miss a single one. And for even more English listening and speaking practice, please be sure to check out our podcast playlist right here on this channel. Each episode is designed to help you improve your English naturally and confidently through real conversations, real topics, and real professional contexts, just like the one we explored together today. You'll find it right in our channel's playlist section, and I truly think you'll love it. Until next time, keep practicing, keep growing, and keep choosing to lead with language. I'm Mano, and I'll see you in the next lesson.